Hello, my name is Nate Bellinger, and I did my research project on the Echo Ridge development in Topeka, Kansas, designed by Dorado architects. The project includes two highly sustainable duplexes with a total of 4 units and a community center that serves the duplexes, as well as the rest of the Echo Ridge community development. To tie this research project together, I'll quickly explain each poster as it pertains to my thesis question, and then go back and further explain the relevance to architectural discourse, the methods used, and the purpose or results. In terms of architectural discourse, this project speaks to a few major topics: sustainability, financing, community living, sustainable living, and urban design for low-income residents. In my thesis, I will address each of these by trying to prove the correlation between sustainable living and the effect it has on a resident's resiliency. Resiliency is an important trait to possess, especially when faced with tough financial times, because it can change a person's life for the better. Low-income families, the elderly, and disabled residents make up 86% of the subsidized public housing in America, and if architecture can help, I would like to provide a solution. The methods used to determine whether or not the sustainable architecture combined with federal funding can have an impact on the residents' resiliency are the key to finding an answer. I studied Dorado's methods and tweaked them slightly to find a better correlations between the architecture and resiliency. In the first poster, I started to look at the issues that the architects thought were important and how they addressed them in the Echo Ridge design. Taken directly from their website, they posed the question: how can sustainable building practices help support community living? When discussing architecture currently, these are two of the bigger issues: sustainability and community living. On the poster, I broke down the overall topics of the research in a diagram. Sustainability is the first one. Echo Ridge incorporates many sustainable building methods in its design. The goal is to help the residents become even more resilient by creating a high-performance building so that their utility bills will be as low as possible. The residents pay little for rent, but they would typically be in charge of paying their own utility bills. The geothermal heating and cooling alone cuts the cost by an estimated 85%. The next topic is community living. The architects wanted to design a space that can help residents interact with each other, learn sustainable living techniques, and essentially live a higher standard of living. The tools that the architects used to enable the residents to be more self-sufficient include covered exterior spaces, community garden and kitchen, cooking classes, and workshops on things from rainwater collection to composting. The third topic is financial impact on low-income residents. The median income level for people using low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC, is only about $16,640 annually. Living expenses for people using LIHTC are mostly utility bills. If, for example, the utility bills were $100 a month, they would end up spending over $5,000, or about a third of what they make annually. Combine that with the income-based rent of 30%, that they're paying close to two-thirds of their income on basic housing. The architects knew the burden that utility bills could be on a financial situation of those using the housing tax credit system. They knew that they needed to design the housing to be as energy efficient as possible to lessen this burden. Designing a building to be this sustainable usually comes at a premium price. However, with the money being invested in this project from the federal government along with tax breaks, Dorado was able to provide a good model of how you can use federal money to really make a difference in the finances of low-income individuals and families. For my thesis, I would like to further study how this conversation can speak to the effects on the residents. Data from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development suggests that the median income of people using public housing in 2012 was well below the national poverty line, and that 40% of those households had children. It is obvious that this demographic is in need of federal support. Because the Echo Ridge development used federal money, HUD subsidies, and tax credits, it creates a positive form of support from the federal government. I will also study the effects of this federal investment in public housing and how this specific project affects the living costs of the residents who desperately need the aid. I would like to have a discussion about the resiliency of residents after living in this community for some time. The first step to understanding the effect of this type of housing on low-income residents is to understand the elements and the people. First, I pose the question: who is eligible for low-income housing? Multiple sources confirm that eligibility is based on citizenship, annual gross income, and being either elderly, disabled, or a family. The chart on the right breaks this down even further. 40% of people in public housing have a child in the household, 30% are elderly, 17% are disabled, and 14% are childless adults. Of the households with children in the existing structure, over 10% of the available housing is inadequate, with over 3% severely inadequate. The last graph shows an increase in occupancy in available subsidized housing units with 94% occupancy in 2013. So if 94% of the housing is occupied and 10% of the housing is inadequate, that means that at least 4% of the low-income residents have to be living in inadequate housing. This shows a major need for more quality public housing in America. The last thing I studied is the location of the interior courtyards and how they can provide moments of unity. By looking at how El Dorado was able to answer their own questions, I was able to develop a similar framework to answer mine. The first step is to refine the search to a singular element of architecture. For the study of Echo Ridge, I looked at how they reworked the traditional form of the duplex and each element of the duplex as it pertains to the overall thesis question. For example, the evidence gathered from the heating and cooling solutions contribute to the claim to relevant architecture that creating a new type of duplex for government subsidized public housing units that includes many sustainable building techniques allows for a great design that can reduce the cost of living for the residents both in the short and long term. And it is a good example of how funding from the federal government can improve the cost and standard of living of low-income housing residents. The next step was to look at the methods that El Dorado uses in their practice. They have 4 main methods to accumulate data in order to answer research questions: understanding, documenting, envisioning, and making. At the bottom of the page, I broke down their process even further through diagramming and reworked it to address my thesis question. In order to find evidence of the residents' resiliency, I made another diagram that will show the correlation between the evidence and resilient behavior. When there is resilient behavior, that means that they have effectively changed for the better and that their financial hardships are beginning to disappear. If there is evidence of resiliency, then it can help to answer my thesis question of, can a sustainable low-income community help its residents to a higher standard of living? To prove this, I must first have the methods in place to make a fair judgment about this. For the third poster, we are interested in finding the causes and effects. The causes are the elements of the architecture that were designed as an answer to El Dorado's thesis question. They were trying to figure out how sustainability can create affordable housing, as well as their effect of creating a better community. The elements of the architecture are defined as causes and effects. The cause describes the role that the element plays in the creation of the building, and it also relates back to the thesis question. The effect describes the answers that can be concluded from the research. The first element from the Echo Ridge development I looked at was the buildings program. The cause of the program was to create situations to foster a sense of community. Through the zones in the community center, we can see that each zone was designed to foster relationships between certain people. The kids zone creates opportunities for kids to interact and become friends. The adult zone creates opportunities for the adults to interact while watching the kids play. The community zone is a flexible space that is primarily used as a dining hall where people can eat together, and the food zone is a space that houses the community kitchen. The community garden is included to get people to do some work together. The act of working together with your neighbors to provide food for your family is a very rewarding experience. The effect of the programming is that there's a stronger sense of community and it keeps growing. El Dorado employs Danielle Cruz as a Sustainable Development Initiatives Manager. She works in the community center to help the residents learn how to cook, garden, live sustainably, and be better neighbors. Her goal is to make her job obsolete. When the residents become resilient enough to teach each other and live sustainably, her goal will be accomplished. This also proves that the architecture has made the residents more resilient through the tools of alliance, collective capacity, social learning, and sustainability. The second element from the Echo Ridge development was the sustainable building elements and practices. The cause of the sustainable elements was to create a lower utility bill to help with the financial burden of the residents. The duplexes were designed with high R49 insulation and passive cooling elements such as tree shade, natural ventilation, and geothermal wells to be a highly efficient building. Each unit is furnished with Energy Star appliances and LED lighting, which also can reduce the typical cost of utility bills. The effect of sustainability on the residents' utility bills is seen in the 85% energy use reduction caused from the geothermal wells alone. John Johnston, president of the Topeka Housing Authority, was quoted as saying, "Their utility bills are going to be about zip." This proves that sustainable building practices can greatly affect utility bills and have a great effect on the resiliency of the residents. The architecture has reduced these costs and therefore can be considered a success. To speak to the resiliency of the residents, the tools of alliance are the key factor here. The residents are in alliance with the federal government because of their investment in them. The last element from Echo Ridge was the financial effect of subsidized housing on the project. The project cost was $13.9 million, but because it had so much money to work with, Dorado was able to invest those tax breaks back into the architecture. This proved to be beneficial to all parties involved. The housing authorities gained a good example that can be reproduced anywhere in the United States to help with the quality of public housing in America. Dorado won 6 awards for their design, including the 2012 Residential Architect Design Awards Affordable Housing Merit in the AIA Central States region, the 2012 Architectural Honor Award from the AIA Kansas City, and the 2013 Best Residential Architecture Award from Kansas City Magazine. In my opinion, the residents were the real winners here. They were provided a space that not only greatly affected their cost of living, but also their sense of community and a higher standard of living. The alliance between the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Kansas Housing Resource Corp., Midwest Housing Equity Group, Topeka Housing Authority, Dorado Architects, and the residents using the LIHTC housing is a great model that can have an effect on those residents' resiliency and the residents throughout the United States. In conclusion, I would like to first remind everyone of my thesis question. How can a low-income community development help to give the residents a better life, and can building sustainably help to increase the resiliency of people living in a low-income community? To answer these, I would say that programming, sustainability, and an infusion of government cash is a good formula to create a space where the residents can thrive. Their bills are much cheaper, alleviating the stresses associated with money struggles because of the design of the sustainable elements. The design of the sustainable elements would not be possible without the tax breaks and grants, so I believe that this is also very important. The residents are also able to build a better life through architectural programming elements of the community gardens, community kitchens, centralized semi-public courtyards, and especially because of the social learning opportunities provided through the programming. The relief of financial stress combined with social learning, alliances, collective capability, and sustainability can be proof of a higher standard of life because they have become more resilient. The individual can choose to take these tools, become more resilient, and make better life for themselves. I believe that this project was a good example of how to use federal money to create a space where low-income residents can become more resilient.